Are you even a millennial if you don't want to buy a plot of land and put a tiny house on it? But in Alaska, everybody wants to do that, and we just call it a cabin. I'm gonna be telling you in this video about my favorite place in all of Alaska, the place that I think is the coolest if you're the kind of person that wants an adventure that's off the beaten path. So I'm gonna share with you where that is exactly, why it's awesome, and why I decided to buy land there. All right, the big reveal. I think the coolest place in all of Alaska is next to the largest national park in the US park system, Wrangell St. Elias National Park. It is this area called McCarthy-Kennecott. And I never understood why some people called it McCarthy and some people called it Kennecott, yet they were talking about the same place. So here's the scoop. Kennecott Copper Mine was the company town for this huge copper mine development. And McCarthy was 5 miles below that, sort of the rough, troublemaking town, right, where you could drink and get into all sorts of trouble. And it's really basically the same way, still to this day. How do you get to this really cool area? Let's say you start in Anchorage. It is a 9-hour drive to get there, which is why a lot of Alaskans even haven't been there. We go on this long drive and we get to this place called Chitina. This is the end of the paved road. And it is then 60 miles of dirt or like heaving road that used to be an old rail line to get that copper out of there into the ocean in Cordova. Then we get to the end of the road, you park your car at the campground, and then you walk across a pedestrian bridge, and there are no cars, nothing but biking, walking, or taking a shuttle in the actual town of McCarthy and on up to the Kennecott mine. Let me tell you about the first time I discovered this place. I lived in Valdez, Alaska. They get 50 feet of snow on average every winter, and it's an intense place, lots of weather. We would often go to McCarthy to go get sun. It's like where the Alaskans vacation. I was dating this guy that had this super cool property there. Lots of little tiny houses and hot tubs and saunas and music and light. I mean, it was this really fantastic place. He took me out to McCarthy, and I remember when we parked and we got on our bicycles and we're pedaling across this pedestrian bridge. The river is ripping underneath us, and I look to my left, and there is the most glorious waterfall, wall of glacier coming off of Mount Blackburn. And I was like, this place is insane. And I hadn't even yet seen the mine. Some people just get the bug. You get bitten by it and you fall in love with this place. And I'll tell you why I like it. Because in Alaska, you're either in the remote bush where you got no support, nothing, or you're in kind of this like suburb place that's anchored. Leaves much to be desired. But what I love about Kennecott and McCarthy area is you can get real good espresso, you can get great food, and yet you're in this very remote and epically beautiful place. I don't know anywhere else in Alaska where you can have those two things in one place. I'm in love. McCarthy and I were meant to be. I knew I wanted to have some sort of presence out there, a cabin, etc. But first, let me give you a little bit of history because I think that that's going to help you understand the context. Backing up to the beginning of the 19th century, there are some prospectors who think they want to go see if there is anything to be developed in the area. And they meet with Otna Chief Nikolai, who takes them in exchange for food for his community that was starving to show them where this mine was. And there was this huge vein of copper. You could see it up in the mountains, and he said, like, there you have it. This is, of course, one of the most tragic stories because they then extracted $200 million, and that was back then dollars, in copper and silver. All the Otna people received in that was some food, and they weren't even able to be employed by the mine, but that's a whole separate conversation. The Jack Smith was one of the prospectors, and then he sold that claim to Stephen Birch. Stephen Birch was one heck of an entrepreneur and go-getter, you could say. He ended up getting money from the JP Morgan and the Guggenheims, like these big, wealthy families of the time, saying, let's go buy the Bonanza claim and go full sendy on getting a mine operation set up in an extremely remote location. Step one, of course, before you can get into this extremely remote backcountry was to access to the ocean where you could be shipping out your product was over 200 miles away in Cordova. They built this very sporty, incredible railroad, my favorite ride. You then get to crossing the Chitina, and they got to come all the way into McCarthy and then come on up into Kennecott. Kennecott is this company town. All the buildings are painted red. The whole town is owned by the company. And they had literally more flush toilets there than they did in the state of Rhode Island. They would get these hot films that were right off the press from Hollywood only 2 weeks after they came out. We are talking a remote stretch of town. I mean, it was mind-blowing. It is freaking cool if you like history. You can go check out all these buildings, you can go up all these old mines, and it's just an adult playground to be able to go around and look at these places. Bottom line, I have fallen in love with the Kennecott-McCarthy area, and I knew that I wanted to somehow, some way have a presence back there. Back in Valdez now, the boy and I split up, and the tiny house that I had been living in exploded with yours truly inside of it because of a gas leak. That is a story for another day, and I actually have a different video about it. I can link it up below if you're curious about what it's like to survive a house exploding with you in it. It's wild. Moral of the story, I'm out of there. I finally take the signs, like I'm moving back to Anchorage, getting my life back on track. Rebuilding from scratch. What am I gonna do with myself? Well, I ended up meeting a super awesome guy. His name's Tobias. He couldn't be here today. I made a little cutout so you could get to know him. You'll be seeing a lot of him in the future. We got married in Wyoming just with our parents and my grandma, and then we came to McCarthy and hosted a super fun dinner party. It was an adventure. Imagine wearing high heels on a glacier. Wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but for the photos, 100% worth it. That night, we're down at the Golden Saloon and the northern lights are just streaming overhead, and everything about the moment was super duper magical. And that was when I realized we need to be able to build our life and our presence out here. And Tobias is a bush plane pilot and just loves flying in the backcountry, and that is what this area is just an absolute mecca for. So it finally felt like I've got a reason and a chance to come back to this area. Fast forward to the next year. I am now 5 months pregnant, finally not puking my guts out, and I go out to McCarthy because I think there is nothing that sleeping on the dirt can't fix. If you've got a bad attitude, it will just straighten you out. So I'm at the toe of the glacier. I'm camped out in a tent by myself, basically working in the morning with a hotspot because I can do my job remotely, teaching people how to write grants. Then I would go to the pool, or not really the pool, but you know, the town swimming hole, go for a swim, and then in the afternoon, I would go and look for property, which there is no Zillow. This is all word of mouth. It was seeing if I could find some for sale signs, just getting to know the landscape, asking anybody I could, what is available for sale. That took me on a wild goose chase. There was one gentleman who had a ton of property for sale and gets me in his four-wheeler to go buzz me around and show it to me. And I thought I drove a four-wheeler like a bat out of hell, and absolutely not. I was like, this is crazy. He's like blasting down the roads. Liked a lot of his property. It was really cool. Trying to figure out, do we want to be on an airstrip or not? Checked out the Fireweed airstrip. They had one parcel left, so that was kind of feeling good. But also, we live on an airstrip right now in Wasilla, and it has its pros and cons. And it was a small piece parcel that was left, and I kind of wanted something bigger, a little bit closer to town. Then I found this other piece that was 10 acres, kind of more than I was necessarily budgeting to buy for land. But it was also one of those pieces that gave you a lot of options. It was close to town. It was on the west side of McCarthy. It was flat. It was graveled. I knew I wouldn't have a long way to get a well to water. Like there was a lot of things that kind of made it make sense. So at this point, I found triangulated all the pieces that I really like, a couple properties. I asked Tobias, I'm like, you got to get out here. You got to come see this. He had some work to do on his plane, fixes it. He's heading out on my phone, tracking him as he's coming in. And I'm like, okay, looks like he's pretty close. So at that point, I get on my bike, 'cause that's the only way I was getting around at that time. And I pedal to the airport, watch him land. It was just absolutely a beautiful, spectacular evening. He gets out his one wheel because he couldn't fit a bike inside his bush plane, and he loves the one wheel, which looks good, but it's a good way to break your collarbone. Would not recommend bringing it in the backcountry. Anyway, he's there and I go show him camp, and the next day we barter with this sweet little girl that her dad had an extra bike. We pedaled all over the McCarthy area so I could show him everything that I had learned over a couple of weeks and try to figure out what piece of property do we want to buy, if any, or do we want to keep looking. We decided on the property, talked to the property owner and said, all right, are you game to do owner financing? Which thankfully he was. This is a really cool tool and I'd highly recommend it because he doesn't have to declare all of those earnings in 1 year because they're spread out over the term of the loan. It allowed the deal to be so an honest, good old-fashioned deal. It came to an agreement on paper of what the terms would be, shook hands on it, that was it. Basically, two individuals with no realtor involved, no professional involved, us just figuring it out. On the whole, went pretty well, but there were definitely some things where we underestimated how long it would take to work with the title company. We go down to American Title, get the deal done, sign on it. We use First National Bank for an escrow, which was fantastic. They do a lot of Alaska financing deals, so they're very familiar with it. And then boom, we're off and running, and I'm making payments to him for this property. If you want me to share the expenses of everything that's going into this, I am happy to do that. Just let me know in the comments if that's something that you care about. I set this up as a business. My current business that I have is doing pretty well. And that means that I have a significant tax bill. I was like, all right, if I want to build my dream, let's see if I can't actually set this up as a business. It's going to lower my overall tax obligations until I figure out, of course, how to make this thing make money, but it's certainly going to be an outflow of expenses for a couple of years. Coming up with the name, I knew I wanted it to have something to do with the word eudaimonia. It is a Greek word meaning a state of human flourishing, happiness, health, and prosperity. And that's 100% the vibe of what I want that place to feel like. It was also inspired by the book Deep Work by Cal Newport. He had this 5-chamber office called a eudaimonia machine to help you access deep work. And I always felt like that is 100% what's needed out here, is a place where you can brush your creativity, write a book, be fulfilled, and not just be in your stupid inbox. Like if you are a computer job type person, you know what I am talking about. But the word eudaimonia kind of sounds like chemical that belongs under your kitchen sink. I was like, okay, how do we give this a spin? We added the word ist onto it. Ist at the end of a word typically means a person that's associated with something that they believe in, a practice. I would 100% say that the type of people that I'm surrounding myself with and want to get to know even more, it is a philosophy that we are trying to live our life unconventionally, not an ordinary life, an extraordinary life. So now we've got Eudaist. What the heck am I gonna do with it? The vision for this property is a series of tiny houses and a lodge for other creative professionals and aviation-loving enthusiasts that want a place to go and access deep work while also being really connected to the outdoors. And if you're like us, you just want a place for your kids to be free range. The idea here is that I would have several tiny houses that would be available for either lease, like long-term lease for multi-years, or maybe looking at like a timeshare agreement where maybe you block like a month of the summer and that's when your family gets it. I'm not exactly sure yet how we're gonna shake that out. I will talk about it more in the later and welcome your feedback if you've seen other models that work well elsewhere. I just wanna be curating a community of people that are just really wonderful. And I think sometimes if you live in Anchorage or you live in other big cities, there's a lot of people we want to be spending time with, and then we don't actually have the time to see them as frequently as we would like. And if we really strip down life to the essence of what matters, it is the quality of our relationships, who we are spending our time with, and if we're doing it in a way that is aligned and healthy, allowing us to feel like, hey, I'm making the most of this very precious time that we have on Earth. What are we going to do now? How are we going to start making this project come to life and get this dream going? Subscribe to this channel if you're into bush flying, adventure families, working remotely, chasing your dreams, and being inspired to do the same. That is the vibe you will find here. See you in the next episode.